My name is Alice Matthews, and what I am about to share still leaves me speechless. I am just an ordinary woman with no extraordinary history before this happened. I grew up in a small town, lived a simple life, and was always a person of faith, though never very devout. My relationship with God was more a silent comfort than something that guided every step of my life. Until that day, it was an ordinary afternoon, and I was in the kitchen making tea when I felt something strange. At first, it was just a slight discomfort, a fleeting weakness, but in seconds, my chest was overtaken by an overwhelming pain. My breathing became short and difficult, and a deep panic took hold of me. My heart raced. My vision began to darken, and before I could call someone, everything around me collapsed into an abyss of unconsciousness. I don't know how much time passed. I only remember that fear was replaced by something unexpected, silence. But it was not an empty silence. It was deep, welcoming, almost tangible. I felt as though I were floating, suspended in a darkness that was not frightening, but serene, as if I were wrapped in a protective cloak. Then, in the distance, a small light appeared, weak at first, but slowly growing. There was something about that light that drew me in, as if it were a call echoing within my very soul. I didn't need to walk, run, or make any effort to reach it. It was as if I were being gently led, and the closer I got, the stronger I felt an indescribable peace, a sense of home, of belonging, something I had never experienced before. The light was not just an intense glow. It seemed alive. It emitted warmth, not in the physical sense, but something deeper, like an embrace that enveloped every part of me. There was a presence there, something beyond human understanding, something that transcended everything I knew. My body, or at least what remained of it, no longer carried weight, pain, or limitations. I simply existed, enveloped by that radiant light, which conveyed a love so overwhelming that it made me cry, even without tears. In the midst of this sensation of fullness, I realized that I was not alone. Something was moving within the light, something that seemed to know me in a way no one ever had. Then I saw him. At first, he was just an indistinct figure, but as my eyes, or whatever was allowing me to see, adjusted, the image became clear. He was there, in the center of the light. Jesus, not in the form I expected, not like the paintings I had seen in churches or in catechism books. His presence was beyond any human description. He radiated an absolute love, a goodness that went beyond any understanding. And when his eyes met mine, it was as if my soul was completely exposed. Everything I was, everything I had done, all my mistakes and regrets were there, before him. But there was no condemnation, only a love so pure that it broke me from within and healed me at the same time. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask why I was there, if I had died, if this was the end. But no words came out, and in truth, I didn't need to ask anything. He already knew. Jesus looked at me with a tenderness I had never seen before, as if every piece of my being had value, as if I were important in a way I had never imagined. And then, with a voice that was not an ordinary sound, but something that resonated within me, he said, "You have returned home, but your journey is not yet finished." Those words echoed within me like a silent thunder. I didn't understand what they meant, but I felt that something grand was happening. Before I could process it, the light around me began to change, and suddenly, I was no longer in that infinite space. Now I was in a vast field, filled with gentle hills, covered in golden grass that seemed to move with the very wind of eternity. In the center of that place, a shepherd was guiding his sheep. Some followed close to him, while others wandered away, heading for dangerous places. At the edge of an endless precipice. The shepherd never shouted, never forced any of them to return. He simply extended his hand, patiently waiting for them to find their way back. As I watched this scene, I understood something profound. That shepherd represented Jesus, and the sheep were us, all of us, lost in our own choices, walking to the edge of abysses without realizing it, yet always having the chance to return. A warmth took hold of me. I wondered how many times I had been on the brink of that precipice without realizing that he was always there, calling me back. Before I could reflect further, the environment around me began to change again. The golden field disappeared, giving way to a deep valley, enveloped by a dense and cold mist. The air felt heavy, and an unsettling darkness hovered over everything. A shiver ran through my soul, and an instinctive fear took hold of me. But then, I felt the presence of Jesus by my side, and his voice, firm and serene, guided me. Look closely. At first, everything seemed frightening. Shadows lurked among the mist. Whispers echoed in the distance, as if 1,000 voices were trying to confuse me. But when I focused on what I saw, I realized something surprising. The shadows had no substance. They were not real. They were merely reflections of fears, illusions that seemed powerful, but which at their core had no real control over me. Do you understand now? Jesus asked. And in that moment, an immense truth was revealed to me. The fear we carry in life, the pain, the anguish, all of it seems overwhelming, unbearable. But in reality, it has no true power over us. They are merely shadows, created by our own perception, fueled by our lack of faith. I saw moments of my life passing before my eyes, moments when I felt alone, lost, desperate. But now I saw clearly. I was never alone. He was always there. Even when I did not see, even when I did not feel, he was by my side, guiding me in silence, waiting for me to trust. I felt tears stream down, but they were not of sadness. They were of a relief so profound that it made me take a deep breath, as if, for the first time, my spirit was truly free. As this understanding deepened within me, the landscape around me began to transform again. The mist disappeared, dissipating like smoke in the wind, and before me appeared something that took my breath away. A celestial banquet. It was an infinite table, stretching beyond what my eyes could reach, adorned with golden plates and foods that seemed to radiate their own light. The air was filled with a sweet fragrance, one I couldn't identify, but that awakened an inexplicable sense of joy and belonging. Around the table, people laughed and celebrated, wrapped in such genuine happiness that I could hardly believe what I was seeing. And then, among them, I recognized faces that were familiar to me. My heart raced. They were loved ones who had passed away years ago, yet there, before me, they appeared more alive than ever. I saw my grandfather, who died when I was a child, smiling at me as if time had never passed. I saw a childhood friend, whom I had tragically lost, looking at me with an expression of pure love. But what shocked me the most was seeing people who, in life, I would never have imagined being there. Among them were those who had hurt me, people who, in some way, had caused pain in my journey. Confusion took hold of me. How could this be possible? How were these people, who had erred so many times, sharing in this divine moment? Before I could say anything, Jesus turned to me, reading my thoughts even before I could express them. Then he said, with the same serenity as always, "My grace is greater than human judgment." Those words echoed within me, breaking something I didn't even know I was still carrying. Throughout my life, I believed I understood what forgiveness was, what mercy was. But there, before that table, I realized how much judgment my heart still held, remembered every wound those people had caused, every hurt I had stubbornly held on to. But now, looking into their eyes, I perceived something different. They were no longer the same. The pain they had caused no longer existed, and the love flowing among everyone there was absolute, without distinction, without conditions. A lump formed in my throat. I thought about how many times in my life I had wondered if some people really deserved God's grace. Now, seeing all of this with my own eyes, I understood the truth. No one deserves it, yet He gives it anyway. Then, something caught my attention. In that celestial banquet, there was a special seat, and on it, a name engraved. My name. My chest tightened. That was my place, reserved for when my journey finally came to an end. A feeling of completeness took over me. I was home, but before I could approach, Jesus looked at me, and with infinite tenderness said, "It is not your time yet." A deep sadness filled me. How could I leave that place? How could I return to a world where pain and fear still existed? But before I could protest, Jesus smiled and touched my hand. In the blink of an eye, everything disappeared. The feeling of fullness vanished in an instant, replaced by a sharp pain that coursed through my chest. The air invaded my lungs violently, as if I were being forcibly pulled back. I suddenly opened my eyes, and everything was confusing. Blinding lights, hurried voices, machines beeping around me. I was back. Doctors and nurses were rushing, surprised and dazed. From what they said later, I had been clinically dead for several minutes. No one understood how I had come back, but I knew. Warm tears streamed down my face, but they were not of fear or despair. They were of longing. I had been home, and now I was back in a world that seemed too small to contain what I had experienced. In the days that followed, I tried to find words to explain what I had experienced. But how do you put something so divine into mere human phrases? Some people listened to me with fascination. Others doubted, trying to rationalize my experience as a simple effect of a collapsing brain. But nothing could convince me otherwise. I knew what I had seen. I knew with whom I had been. The love I felt, the truth that was revealed to me. Everything was more real than anything I had ever experienced in this world. Psalm 23, which had once been just a comforting verse, was now a truth etched into my soul. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I had been before the shepherd. I had felt His presence, His voice, His promise. And now my mission was to spread that truth, so that no one would ever doubt that He is always with us, even when we cannot see Him. Returning to routine after something like this was almost impossible. How can one go on living normally after looking into the eyes of Jesus? How can I worry about minor frustrations, fleeting problems, after having felt the purest and most absolute love that exists? In the first days, I felt an anguish I couldn't explain. I desperately wanted to go back. Not because I didn't value my life here, but because I knew what awaited me on the other side. However, something inside me told me that this longing was not a punishment, but a reminder. I still had something to do. My journey was not yet finished. So, even without fully understanding, I did the only thing that seemed right. I began to share my story. To each person who listened to me, I observed different reactions. Some cried, moved by the certainty that God is truly by our side. Others remained silent, trying to process everything. And of course, there were those who doubted, who looked at me with skepticism or condescending smiles. But none of that mattered. My faith did not depend on the acceptance of others. I knew what I had experienced. I knew what I had seen. And if my mission now was to spread that truth, I would do it, regardless of who believed or not, because, in the end, it doesn't matter how many rational explanations people try to offer for what happened to me. The only thing that really matters is that God's love is real, and I was a witness to it. Over time, I realized that my experience was not just a gift, but also a responsibility. I could no longer live as I did before. Each day now had a greater purpose, even if I didn't know exactly what it was. I began to see people differently, their pains, their fears, their struggles. The judgment I once carried gradually dissolved. If Jesus could look at me with so much love, even knowing all my flaws, who was I to deny that same love to someone else? The lesson of the celestial banquet remained alive within me. His grace is not for a select few. It is not for the perfect. It is not for those we think deserve it. It is for everyone. And if he brought me back, perhaps it was to remind people of that. However, there was another truth that now became part of me. This life is only a passage. Before, I feared death, like anyone else. But now, no longer, because death is not the end. It is merely the crossing over to something much greater, to the true home that awaits us. Since that day, I have lived without fear. I know that when my time truly comes, my place is already reserved. I know that I will see again the faces I encountered at that table. I know that I will feel, once again, that indescribable peace. But until then, I do what I can so that others might also have that certainty. Because if there is something I learned from my experience, it is that no one is alone. The shepherd is always guiding us, even when we cannot see him. Even today, when I close my eyes and allow myself to remember, I can almost feel that warmth again, that presence that enveloped me in a way that words can never describe. Sometimes, I wonder why I was chosen to experience this. What in me made God allow me to see what I saw? But then I realize that perhaps the question is not that. Perhaps the real question is, what will I do with this experience? And the answer is simple. I will use it to spread hope, to remind people that there is something greater waiting for us, that we are not wandering alone in this world, that there is a love that does not fail, does not fade, and does not depend on what we do or fail to do. So, if you are reading this and have ever felt lost, alone, or without direction, know that He is with you, even now, even if you cannot see, even if you do not feel, even if you have doubts or think that you have gone too far to return. I stood before Him, and I can assure you, there is no place where His love cannot reach you. My journey is not yet over, and perhaps yours isn't either. But one day, when our time truly comes, there will be a place reserved for each one of us. And when we sit at that table, we will finally understand that we were never alone.